Hi everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever and whenever you are. In this video, I'm just going to be going over some of my favorite free online ebooks, and I'm going to be focusing in on some more obscure books. I said classics, some of them I would call classics, but it's kind of subjective. But yes, all free and mostly from Project Gutenberg. So if you're not familiar with Project Gutenberg, I think most people are, but it's basically an online repository of public domain books. And they have pretty much every work of classic literature you can imagine. And it's pretty nicely organized. They have many different formats. And I'm going to really be focusing on the EPUB format, which is the open, non-proprietary ebook package format, whatever you want to call it. Basically the open version of Kindle or Nook. And if you're not one that likes to read online, I have an app to recommend. I mean, Project Gutenberg does give you the HTML, so if you like reading online on your computer, no big deal. But I also want to talk about this app real quick, and it's not a sponsored product by any means. But I've been using this for probably about a year. I've just found it to be very, very usable and just a great way to make these Project Gutenberg ebooks more readable for me personally on my tablets and phones. So definitely check this out and other apps like it if you enjoy public domain books and just want something easy to use. So yeah, let's get started on some of these books. So, Gutenberg has Dickens. They've got more famous classics like Jane Austen and so forth. I want to share some books I've enjoyed from here that are more obscure. So starting with A Tangled Tale by Lewis Carroll. Most people are familiar with Lewis Carroll, author of Alice in Wonderland. What this is a collection of short stories, and each short story has a math problem embedded into it. So kind of like a story problem, except much more fun than a regular story problem. And at the time of publication, he actually released this in segments to the public, and they would write in their answers to him, and then he would respond in the next installment. So all of that is included in this book, and it's a lot of fun. You can see some of the names people used when they were submitting their answers were kind of interesting. I did a whole post on that actually, so maybe I'll link to that in the description. But overall, a super fun book. The problems are mostly algebraic, but not necessarily easy ones. But I really enjoy it, and I read it again and again every so often. So check that out if you like puzzles or Lewis Carroll or both. The next one I wanted to talk about is Round the Red Lamp: Being Facts and Fancies of Medical Life by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The author of Sherlock Holmes, he actually wrote a lot of other books as well. As you can see, they have 137 titles by him. And he wrote historical fiction, he wrote contemporary horror and science fiction. And this particular collection, Round the Red Lamp, kind of comes under the horror side of things. There's a mix here of fanciful stories and realistic stories based on his own experience as a doctor. So I definitely recommend this. It's just very interesting to read. Yes, one of my favorite stories, in fact, is this one called Lot Number 249. And that one's a spooky story, so definitely read that one, if not all of these. Yeah, so Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, lots to explore there. Another one that I really liked by him was Through the Magic Door. Now, this one is actually not fiction. This is a non-fiction memoir, which is written in the form of kind of a conversation with the reader. And in this book, Doyle talks about literature. history, other authors, and Napoleonic Wars, Dr. Johnson, all different kinds of things. And he talks about the writing process as well. So it's really, I just really enjoyed this from a writing perspective. Any fans of Doyle would probably enjoy this. So yeah, that's a kind of a really obscure memoir that I think deserves more attention. Speaking of memoirs, some other memoirs that I enjoyed from Project Gutenberg were 3 by Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad, the author of Heart of Darkness, Nostromo, and Lord Jim. And his stories tend to be focused around the sea. He was most famous for his sea stories. And so his memoirs, likewise, are very much focused on that as well. The Mirror of the Sea, A Personal Record, and Notes on Life and Letters. So these are actually all quite different. A Personal Record is the most biographical of the books. So if you're interested in learning about Conrad's background as a Polish immigrant and, his just scenes and things from his life, I think you would enjoy this. The Mirror of the Sea is more about the sea conceptually, if that makes sense. He spends a lot of time talking about the end of the era of the wooden ship and the transition to steamships, which he lived through. And I just find it really interesting. I'm kind of I would say sea stories are probably my favorite genre, and I just kind of nerded out over that. So if that kind of thing interests you, then this is a great firsthand account of what it was like to work on ships at that time and see those changes happening. And then for the more general audience, I would recommend Notes on Life and Letters. He talks about some other authors in here, like Stephen Crane of Red Badge of Courage. And then he also talks about things that happened during his lifetime, like his first flight on an airplane and his opinions on the Titanic and its sinking. Super fascinating stuff if you're into that kind of history. Okay, so moving on from memoirs, we kind of spent a lot of time there. Novels. So I was assigned to read this book in one of my college courses. I think I actually chose to read this book. We had a list, and it's called Wyland, The Transformation, An American Tale by Charles Brockden Brown. Charles Brockden Brown, I believe he was a contemporary of Jane Austen, if I'm remembering correctly. This would have been like late 1700s, early 1800s, somewhere around there. And 1798, there we go. It's a very strange book, very strange. It's a horror story about basically demonic possession. I mean, it's a really weird story, and it's not really what you would have expected from that time period. So it's kind of an oddity. I wouldn't say I recommend it as a novel, but if you're looking for something quite kind of out there, then this is available on Project Gutenberg, as are some other books by him. I think he was most known for his spooky stories. So, yeah, that's one I did read. Another one that I liked a little better, which is also kind of a spooky story, is An Antarctic Mystery by Jules Verne. Jules Verne actually wrote this as a sequel to Edgar Allan Poe's only novel, which was the narrative of Gordon Pym. And this book, basically think Ancient Aliens, except if Jules Verne was writing it. There's no aliens in it, but it's got that kind of vibe to it. To be honest, I don't remember a great deal from this book, but it was quite different than any other Jules Verne book I have read. And I don't know that he really wrapped up the loose ends very well for a sequel. So still, I think if you're someone who enjoys Jules Verne, or if you read the Edgar Allan Poe novel, this would be one you'd want to check out at some point. Okay, so lately I know there's been a lot of excitement about the new Little Women movie, which I haven't seen yet. One of the novels that is actually mentioned in Little Women by Alcott is The Heir of Redcliffe, and it is on Project Gutenberg. It was, during its day, a bestseller, hence the reference in Little Women. And basically, it was a blockbuster back then, and it's since fallen out of fashion. It's a very religious book. So basically, it's I would almost call it sort of a gothic romance, except the gothic elements are very toned down, and it's more of a moralistic tale, and there is a lot of Anglicanism in it. So those elements, I think, really probably appealed to the readership at the time, but since then have lost readership. And to be honest, though there were some really compelling characters in this book and themes and storylines, I did not feel it was very well written, honestly. The conflict to me was not terribly clear, and when the conflict isn't clear, it's hard for me to really feel committed to the story, I guess. But it was certainly an influential story of its time. And I think if you're into Victorian literature, you should definitely check it out at some point. And just for context, it's one of those books that, due to its influence, is worth reading, even if you don't really care for it on its own. Okay, so I just have two more here. So the next book is actually the one I have not read yet, and this one is incredibly obscure. This is Charles Auchester by Elizabeth Sarah Shepherd. She was basically a bit of a child prodigy, and this is in the, I think, mid-Victorian era. She was acquainted with Disraeli, and he actually helped her, I believe he actually helped her publish this book. And it's a kind of like a fan fiction in a way about the composer Felix Mendelssohn. And if you haven't heard of Felix Mendelssohn, well, he wrote the melody to Hark the Herald Angels Sing. He wrote a very famous violin concerto and some really good symphonies. He's one of my favorite composers, personally. But yeah, this is incredibly obscure. But Disraeli apparently thought it was good enough to help her get it published. So I'm really curious to read this someday, especially as a Mendelssohn fan and knowing something about his life. I'm really interested in how she portrayed this in novel form. And she actually, okay, they don't have it here, but she actually wrote a similar kind of novel about Beethoven. I think it's called Rumor. But anyway, yeah, super obscure, but just one of those things that will certainly appeal to a niche audience such as myself. And then the last one I want to just mention, and this isn't Project Gutenberg, I think it used to be, but anyway, Personal Recollections of Nathaniel Hawthorne by Horatio Bridge. If you're a fan of Nathaniel Hawthorne and or Henry Longfellow, you'll probably really enjoy this memoir. It is, it's basically a biography of Hawthorne, but it focuses in very much on, his college years, and you just really get to know him a bit better than you do from his writing. I certainly enjoyed it. It's a very respectful biography by someone who knew him well, and you get a nice picture of that era, which was kind of a unique era, dark romanticism, and, everything leading up to the Civil War. Franklin Pierce, in fact, one of the presidents preceding the Civil War, he was also, I believe, a schoolmate at college with Hawthorne and Longfellow. So yeah, kind of fun from both a literary and historical perspective. And yeah, so that is all I have for this video. Hope this was semi-interesting. Let me know if you are interested in more videos. I mean, I could probably dig up many more obscure classics I've read that, again, may appeal to more people than you'd think at first glance. So thank you for watching, and please like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.